Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we connect people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed. I'm Jeff Pele. Thanks for being with us. Welcome to part 3 of our election results analysis as we wrap up election week 2024. Today, we're going to talk all about pivot counties, which is a really interesting and exciting analysis that we do here at Ballotpedia, and it's a really fun way to look at the presidential election, if I may say so myself. We're going to take a closer look at the data, and with us, we have Ellen Morrissey, regular on the show, ready to dive into our presidential data today, Ellen?
Absolutely. I'm always ready to dive into presidential. Happy to be here.
Holding on by a thread. What are you going to do? The presidential election is done now. Now what? Right?
Well, now we start covering the 2028 presidential election, but we don't need to talk about that yet.
and the transition of the administration. So there's always plenty to write about and cover. So, all right. Well, let's tell our listeners, what is a pivot county?
Well, we define pivot counties as counties that in 2008 voted for Barack Obama, in 2012 voted for his re-election, but then in 2016, after voting twice for Democrats, in 2016 they voted for Donald Trump. So they pivoted from voting twice for Obama to voting for Trump. There are 206 counties like this nationwide, and they're spread across 34 states. You might also kind of hear them referred to as swing counties. They often kind of swing between parties. They're primarily located in the northern Midwest and the Northeast United States. But as I mentioned just now, they're spread across 34 different states. Maine has the highest percentage of pivot counties at 50% of the counties in the state, which account for about 47% of the population. But if you look at pivot counties by just raw count of counties, you'll find the most in Iowa at 31, followed by Wisconsin at 23, Minnesota 19, New York 18, Michigan 12, and then 11 in Illinois. As far as kind of like why they're interesting, kind of an interesting thing to look at, they represent shifts in the electorate, both kind of like regionally and demographically, that have implications not only for presidential elections, but elections up and down the ballot. So, state level, local. And there are oftentimes, there are quite a few bellwethers within our group of pivot counties. So these are counties that vote for a winning candidate every election within, whatever time frame you want to look at. So they can kind of be predictive tools or kind of a way to get the pulse of the nation, I guess. As of November 6th, we've identified 14 counties that have voted for the correct presidential candidate from 2008 to 2024. Although an important caveat for kind of this whole episode is that results are still being reported. So these numbers may be subject to change as we get kind of final results and certified results over the coming weeks. The most of these bellwethers can be found in Minnesota. Looking at it regionally, there are 5 in the upper Midwest and 5 in the Northeast. So those are kind of biggest groupings.
Yeah, and so pivot counties, to your point, they're not a very large amount of the population. So for instance, in 2016, we know that the pivot counties, 206 of them, they cast 7.5 million votes, which is about 5% of the total vote in the election. But between 2012 and 2016, Democratic popular vote in pivot counties fell by 2 million votes, which made up about 51% of the overall decline in Democratic popular vote turnout. So, when you looked at these 206 pivot counties, we thought, okay, these all went from Obama to Trump. Did they stay in the Republican column, or did they go back to Biden and then Harris in this cycle? So what have we seen so far? Did these counties, become regular Republican counties, or have they what we call boomerang back?
That's a great question. So there are 206 counties total. After the 2020 election, we saw Trump retain 181 of those counties, while Biden ended up flipping 25 of them back to Democratic. In 2024, what we're seeing so far, we have 14 counties that we still have not called yet. We are currently seeing Trump with 183 wins, so slightly higher than last cycle. And then Harris is currently only at 9. And if we want to kind of dive deeper into those numbers for Trump and Harris. For Trump, there are 169 pivot counties that we've counted so far across 27 states that Trump has won in 2016, 2020, and 2024, while there are only 14 pivot counties in 10 states that voted for Trump in 2016, Biden, and then boomeranged back to Trump. Looking at the 9 counties that voted for Harris this cycle, there are 2 pivot counties, one in Vermont and one in Connecticut, that Trump won in 2020, but then Harris ended up carrying this cycle. And then there are 7 pivots across 6 states that voted for Trump 2016, Biden 2020, and then now continue that trend, voted Harris in 2024.
Gotcha. Yeah. We know from, early analysis and reporting about the election that, there was, movement pretty much across the country, across the counties and states in Republican direction, with Trump making gains across the country, not just in the battleground or pivot county states. What kind of notable observations do you have from the pivot counties, beyond those so far? What do we see in swing states, for instance?
So there are 7 total swing states we were tracking this election. 5 of them have pivot counties. Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin all have pivot counties. In total, across those states, there are 49. Trump has won 48 of them so far by our count. They won all but Door County in Wisconsin, which by voting for Harris this cycle has ended its run as a 21st century bellwether county. We saw the biggest Republican gains by margin, which want to repeat here as well, just that votes are still being counted, so these margins are subject to change. But looking at the margins as of November 6th, Trump had the biggest gains in Robeson, North Carolina, with a 8.8% shift Republican. And then all but one of North Carolina's 5 pivot counties shifted more than 5 points towards Republicans between 2020 and 2024. There were only 2 counties where Republicans lost ground in pivot counties. That is Manistee County in Michigan, performing 1.61 points worse this cycle than 2020, and then Sauk County in Wisconsin, which performed 0.1 points worse. So, a pretty minor shift in that one. But
yeah. Okay. And what do we know, Ellen, about Clallam County, Washington? So for listeners, Clallam County, Washington was the record holder presently for the longest running streak of their voters accurately picking the winner of that election, going all the way back to 1980. How did the Clallam County voters do in this cycle? Because obviously, if Clallam County is one of the 206 pivot counties, because if you went Obama, Trump in 08, 12, and 16, you correctly picked the winner in all 3 of those cycles. There are only 206 counties that did that. So Clallam County, Washington, is the one that has the longest win streak back to 1980. What did we see this cycle?
Clallam County has, like Door County, lost its bellwether crown this cycle. We saw in 2020, Clallam voted Joe Biden by a 3.37% margin, and this cycle we saw the county vote Harris with a 10.4% margin. So we definitely see it trending Democratic against national trends.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so Ellen, so Clallam was the prior record holder. The Clallam County, Washington voters picked Harris this cycle, which means they are no longer the longest record holder for correctly picking the presidential winner. So who's our new record holder? Which county?
Yeah, so Clallam had a pretty good streak. They voted correctly from 1980 through 2020. As you said, they voted Harris in 2024, so that streak has ended. Our current streak holder is Blaine County, Montana. They have voted correctly for the president every cycle since 1992. This cycle, Trump won the county by 6.8 points.
All right. Well, we've got our new record holder out of Blaine, Montana. So that's really interesting because prior to 2020, with Clallam being the record holder, I think the 2 counties that had been the record holders before that had called it all the way back to like the 1960s. So, you learn a lot about how the country shifts its political preferences each cycle like this. So what other interesting margin of victory analyses stick out to you, Alan, with respect to our pivot county data so far?
We've done some analysis of kind of margins of victory in these counties, which I'll sound like a broken record here, but we're doing with incomplete votes reported. So grain of salt, check our page again if you're listening to this a couple days from now. We'll have more accurate numbers. But what we're looking at right now, Trump's average margin of victory in 2024 was 18.1 points in these pivot counties, which is an increase from 2020 when it was 14.1 and 2016 when it was at 11.5. Looking at Harris's performance here, we're only looking at a pool of 9 counties, so we're kind of working with a lot less data than the 180 some counties that we're looking at for Trump. So among those 9 counties, Harris's average performance was an 8.7 margin of victory, but the median was only 1.2 points. If we look back to 2020, Biden had a lower average at 3.3 among 25 counties that he won, and a higher median at 3.4 percentage points. Looking at the 169 pivot counties that Trump has won in both 2020 and 2024, his margin of victory increased in a vast majority of these in 161 counties and decreased in only 8. Looking at the 7 pivot counties won by Biden in 2020 and Harris in 2024, Harris yielded a smaller margin of victory than Biden in 5 of them. Of the 9 total pivot counties won by Harris in 2024, she also yielded a smaller margin of victory in 6 of them than Obama had in 2012.
Gotcha. Very interesting. So yeah, again, that sort of tracks as we dig deeper into the data. One of the things that we're going to be looking at is how did President Trump do in the pivot counties relative to the rest of the nation? So we'll look for more analysis from us in the coming weeks ahead to see if, were these pivot counties situations where he was gaining more votes and a greater vote share? Was it in line with the rest of the country? Or, did Trump overperform in non-pivot counties relative to these sort of pivot counties from the prior year? So, well, Alan, get some rest this weekend. It was great to see you and have you on the show over the last few weeks as we got ready for and then crunch numbers in the election cycle, and time to get ready for our next layer of coverage, the administration itself. So good to see you as always.
Absolutely. Nice to see you too.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks.
And for listeners, you can learn more about pivot counties at the link in our show notes. We'll be back next week with more episodes of On the Ballot. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Jeff Pallett, and thanks for listening.